The Minnesota Vikings defeat the Atlanta Falcons 42-21 and advance to 11-2 on the NFL season. And I got the cross shirt on. My friend's got his blessed shirt on. Yup, rep it hard. Here we go. Mr. Daniel Hines is joining me for the first time on the Minnesota Tim podcast to discuss the recent Vikings victory. We're dads, we're husbands, we're responsible, so we got to take kids to games sometimes. Dan, thanks for taking time to join the podcast today.
You sent me the invite. I'm like,
wow.
Clear my schedule, Brielle. We're leaving early. Get you to soccer, get you out of the car. Yeah, we needed a win like that.
Well, if this video gets 10 million downloads and views, I'll know it's you just hitting that refresh button every single time.
There's a good chance.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you taking time to join the show today, and let's just discuss it. Vikings dominate 42-21, not even close. Well, it was until the fourth quarter, where the Minnesota Vikings put up 21 points and the Atlanta Falcons put up 0. Your takeaway from the dominating performance that was?
There's still a lot of questions, obviously, because as you just mentioned, it didn't feel dominant. It felt dominant for about 10 minutes, during the fourth quarter. And there's definitely some things that we should talk about regarding some run defense and, maybe a few things that we have to be concerned about. But I would say the first thing is just thank you for not having it be a nail biter for every minute of the game. We needed the stress, the holidays, just being a Minnesota Vikings fan in general. We needed a good win like that. So I would.
It's true. They put up Kevin O'Connell's record, and he's got a great record in one-score games. But going back a few years ago, they were 13-4, and every single win they had was like a one-score game. Last year, a lot of one-score wins. And the NFL, you play close games, so I'm not going to hold that against you. But every once in a while, it's nice to have a little treat and give us a little blowout action. And in the fourth quarter, well, actually in the third quarter, I was thinking when Darnold threw that bomb to Jefferson, you go up 21-13. And it's like, wow, this game's over. Like, that's the play. That's going to be the thing. And that's going to be the moment. Well, now the Falcons go down scoring 5 plays, rushing the ball right down the throats on the Minnesota Vikings, go for a 2-point conversion, get the 2-point conversion, tie 21-21. And it's like, okay, Minnesota Vikings offense, you got to go make plays again.
Yeah, I think you summed it up perfectly.
Right?
I think that was the crux of the game. I think you can take so much away from that. I mean, the first thing, we have to just give love to Sammy Darnold, man. I mean, I was just looking at some of his TDs. Lamar Jackson already had his game this week, so this puts him third in the league in touchdowns, only behind Lamar Jackson and Burrow. That guy's got 28 touchdowns now. I mean, it's starting. My daughter came up to me, or she was in the car with me, and she goes, are we gonna keep Sam? And I said, well, probably not. He's
we can't afford him.
And you have a big, do you think there's any scenario? I told her basically he would need to get probably to an NFC championship game, perform very well, if not even get to a Super Bowl. I think if you do that, we got a lot of cap space. I know we don't want to spend it on Sammy D, but I mean, there's got to be an argument. I don't know how.
Yeah. Right, there definitely is. Right, I mean, the question is that the Minnesota Vikings have to answer: do they believe that J.J. McCarthy can play to this standard that Sam Darnold is playing this year? Because this is a move that could possibly get the guys in the organization fired. You move off of Sam Darnold, J.J. McCarthy's a bust, and axe, you're out, you're gone. Like there's no doubt about it. And right now he's playing like a franchise quarterback, 28 touchdowns, 10 interceptions in a game versus Kirk Cousins where, the story is about Kirk returning to U.S. Bank Stadium, returning versus former team. He goes out for 5 touchdowns, has a passer rating of 157.9, which is just a few points I don't know how it's not a perfect passer rating. 158.3, right? 0.4 from perfect passer rating. 22 for 28, 347 yards. Bomb to Addison, bomb to Jefferson, bomb to Addison, bomb to Jefferson. I mean, that was his best career NFL game by a mile, and he is putting himself into that MVP conversation. But going back to your point of can we pay Sam Darnold, the further he goes, NFC Championship game, Super Bowl, well, the more his dollar goes up from a team like the Raiders or the Giants or some other organization. And here's the problem with Sam. We're signing him, that is. He's not a guy that's already had a big contract extension like Kirk Cousins has had and would be willing to kind of negotiate at the table a little bit with the Vikings and maybe taking a number agreeable on both sides. He had his first big rookie contract because he's like a top 3 pick. But then he never got a big contract after that because he was a bust with the Jets and with the Panthers and was a backup with the Niners. He doesn't have that second big contract. And this is his time to cash in with an NFL franchise. So there's no way that Sam's agent or Sam want to do that because this is his one time to make it for the rest of his life and for the rest of his family. This is generational wealth. And I think about Kirk Cousins, he got booed, and of course he's going to get booed. He left the Vikings organization, but he did what we all would have done. Okay, you got a 2-year contract sitting here from the Vikings, or you got a 4-year contract worth $100 million guaranteed from the Falcons just sitting.
Right.
What are any of us going to do? We're going to take the money. There's no doubt about it. So Darnold's going to do the exact same thing, and the Vikings just have to hope that their investment in J.J. McCarthy is going to pan out.
Take it a step further, and this is why I told her it's extremely unlikely, because it is for their jobs, and you're putting your trust more in Kevin O'Connell and his system and his coaching than you are in Sam Darnold at this point. He's got 6 years with multiple coaches. You got to look at that lineage and go, okay, what's different this year? Talent around him, offensive scheme, and coaching. That's what's different. And so if you look at J.J. McCarthy, he might not have quite the arm that Sam does. I don't know enough about J.J. McCarthy's intangibles. What I do.
Well, Darnold's arm is elite level. Yeah. So,
And you saw it today. I mean, say what you will. He's been managing games, with an amazing offense that's got us to 11 wins. But today you saw some of those throws. I mean, even that wide open throw to JJ, that's a running on the throw off of 1 foot dagger down the field. Even when the defender fell off of him, he didn't have a chance. I mean, they got down to him so fast. And so those are maybe a few intangibles, but really you got to back Kevin O'Connell on this one, and you got to back the draft pick. And I do think that guys like Sam Darnold, those mid-range managers with a little more upside on the performance side are there. And so, I mean, you have one, you just signed one to the practice squad in Daniel Jones. He's eventually Sam Darnold. So you have some options there. And I think the move is not to. I just think I'm just happy for Sam, and I'm obviously happy for the Vikings. I want to see him crush it. But yeah. So I think all those things aside, we're probably not going to sign him, but it's amazing. It's amazing what he's doing. It's amazing.
It is amazing. It is. It really is. Yep. 5 touchdowns. First time that's happened in a Minnesota Vikings uniform for any quarterback since Dante Culpepper back in the early 2000s. And I can't help but wonder, Kevin O'Connell understands the situation. Kirk Cousins coming back. Everyone does. I can't help but wonder if Kevin O'Connell, the offensive play caller, not just the head coach on the Vikings, is trying to needle Kirk Cousins a little bit. I don't necessarily think it's a coincidence that Sam Darnold, in Kirk Cousins' comeback to the Minnesota Vikings, threw for a career high 5 touchdowns. I think he's poking at the bear a little bit and saying, you know what? Suck on this in Atlanta. Have a fun flight back. Kirk Cousins, by the way, 0 touchdowns, and he's had 0 touchdowns the last several games. So you think about Sam Darnold, 28 touchdowns, 10 picks for the year. Kirk Cousins has 17 touchdowns, 15 interceptions on the year. And we're paying Sam Darnold $10 million a year. So you think about who won, right?
So what were your concerns? Like, what did you see that, ultimately worried you? Because those first three quarters were pretty tight.
They were tight. And I guess the one thing that stood out to me a little bit was the rushing attack, right? The Atlanta Falcons. I'll share the screen with everyone so you can check out the rushing attack. But it's not like they steamrolled us all day, every day either. There's a little concern from the rushing, but at the same time, Falcons only scored 21 points. Like, as far as I'm concerned, this was as close to a perfect game that the Minnesota Vikings could play all around. Offensively, 0 turnovers. Defensively, 2 picks. And Bijan Robinson, their stud, 22 carries for 92 yards. He didn't run for over 100. Tyler, their backup running back, 9 carries, 63 yards. The receivers, Darnell Mooney, 142. Ray McLeod, 8 for 98. So, they had some big splashy plays. They had moments. I think what stood out to me was that it seemed like the Atlanta Falcons had some short throws that became splashy. They had some short intermediate routes that they ended up taking for 30, 40 yards at times. So there's nothing really that jumps out at me where I'm just like, oh crap, like this is not good for an 11-2 football team down the stretch. After this game, it's overwhelmingly positive. The Vikings are getting hot at the right time in the NFL season. And that was my concern early on in the year. Like, they started out 5-0, but who cares if you start out 5-0? The Eagles were like 10-0 last year, but they collapsed down the stretch. The Vikings are 11-2. They went like this, and then they came back down, and they're soaring back up again. And that is great news.
I think the last 2 games, we've averaged about 150 yards on the ground. And if I'm Flores, that's what I'm looking at. It's pretty clear that the Vikings defense is that bend don't break opportunistic squad. They're going to give up some yards. They're going to give up some time of possession. They tend to hold people more to the 3 than to the 7. Although these are teams the last few weeks that we also have to recognize are middle of the road teams as well. And so we have to factor that in. Those turnovers are going to be more crucial. Getting stops on first down where these runners aren't picking up 7 yards a pop and giving the entire playbook, over to the quarterback to kind of tear us apart. So I do think Flores has a little bit there. I think you can look at the last 2 games and you can make an argument like if the good teams get the idea that they can put up 150 rushing yards on this defense, there's going to be a lot more 7-point scores going forward when we start seeing the Detroits and the Phillies and the Green Bays of the world. And, that's gonna see what we're truly made of here. So the other aspect of it is, our offense, when it explodes, but there tends to be this tick, 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 boom. And sometimes the ticking gets a little annoying and it takes too long. Today, it wasn't too bad. It was fairly steady, and I'm with you. There's no reason to be hypercritical here. I'm nitpicking. 42 points at home. This is exactly what the Vikings needed. This is amazing. Let's celebrate. I mean, crazy. My daughter just goes, how many wins do we have? I'm like, 11. I'm like, who saw that? Let's just go back for a moment and pause and just remember that not a single person, not any minute, except some diehard, brain dead, Vikings fan that's just all in on Super Bowl every single year. There's nobody with 2 cents that's being objective that saw the Vikings any better than 500 this year. And here we are. Did we clinch a playoff spot? I mean, it's got to be close.
It's close. The Cardinals and the Rams, I think, have to lose for a playoff spot to be clinched. And the Cardinals are playing the Seahawks, and the Rams are playing the Bills. So 2 possible scenarios that are very likely.
Have you looked at the playoff, situation? I was really rooting for Green Bay. I mean, talk about that Green Bay-Detroit game. I was torn because it's one of those rare NFL oases where you win every single play as a Minnesota Vikings fan, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
15 minutes of absolute bliss, rooting for every, good play or bad play. But at the end of the day, I was weighing the analysis, and I'm like, no, I want Green Bay to win. I want a shot at the division, and I'm looking at the all three teams have a fairly difficult, mid-range to difficult schedule because they're all playing each other. We play Green Bay, we play Detroit, we play Chicago, and then we have Seattle in there. Green Bay and Minnesota has Seattle, and I think Detroit has the tougher of the schedule because they have to go to Buffalo or Buffalo. Yeah.
They play Buffalo, yeah.
I think there's a real chance for a Detroit loss there. There's a real chance we're playing for the division in Detroit. And so...
Not just the division, but the bye. Yeah, the bye throughout the playoffs. Like if we beat Detroit at Detroit, and that's ultimately what it comes down to. And that's where I came with the opinion that I was rooting for the Packers because can the Vikings beat the Lions on the road? Well, I'm going to guess no. But at the same time, the Lions, they beat Green Bay by 3 last Thursday. They beat the Bears by 3. They beat us by... It's not like the Lions are some invincible team, even though the national media wants to make them think they're invincible. Like everyone's talking about Lions. Lions, they're a good team. They're 11-1. But it's not like they're just blowing out every team 40-0.
Any more injuries at all. They can't afford any more injuries. They are as beat up and destroyed as any team out there. So, I mean, and I like there's a soft spot in my heart. I mean, this is going to be blasphemous as a Minnesota Vikings fan. But when you watch...
I think there's a soft spot in everyone's heart. Yeah.
Yeah,
for the Lions. For the Lions. Everyone loves the Lions.
It's really interesting. But, I mean, I want the division. It's coming down, and I want home field advantage. And I don't see why at this point we shouldn't be in the conversation for this. And I think National will now kind of lump us in after a dominating win. We got, Chicago next? And then Seattle, then Green Bay, then Detroit. Is that right? Okay. So we'll get Chicago more than likely, although it's the Bears, it's the bit. Nothing's guaranteed. But
right. The Bears have been playing competitive football recently.
The 5 and the 6 seed really isn't that big a deal. I mean,
you don't think
Seattle maybe versus Tampa.
I think it's a huge deal. Yeah, I mean it's true. Tampa versus Seattle. I think
would you rather have?
That's true. I guess when I compare those two teams, I'd rather have Tampa.
No, Baker Mayfield scares me. He's a giant slayer, man. He's beaten.
It's true.
He's beaten.
Yeah, he is.
He's beaten.
He is.
So he scares me a little bit at home. I almost feel like Seattle's a play, but either way, it's just such a bummer when you imagine a scenario where we could be 14-3 and going on the road to play a 7-8, 8-7. It's
right.
Yeah. So
divisional team, right? Like, yeah.
No, we're not playing for second here. We're not playing for 5th seed, 6th seed. Like we need to have our eyes on Detroit, and we got to believe we can do it. And I think the odds aren't in our favor right now, but they're not bad.
Definitely not, especially with the way that they're ascending right now. Sam Darnold should be in the MVP conversation. And I have a big rant about the MVP. Like, I have an issue with the award because it's just a reputation, take your turn kind of award. Like Lamar Jackson has won 2, but it goes Mahomes, Lamar Jackson. Now this year it's going to be Josh Allen because he hasn't won one yet, and it's Josh Allen's turn, and the Bills are 10-2, and Josh Allen's like the media hype guy this year because the Bills are good, and he's a great quarterback. Like, don't get me wrong, but the conversation in my mind's already over. I don't think Darnold has a chance to win it, but he should win it based on where he has the Minnesota Vikings this year and the numbers that he's putting up. But Kirk Cousins, here's a stat, last 4 games, and they have a rookie quarterback, mind you, sitting in the wings. Yeah, from Washington, who took his team to the national championship game the prior year. 0 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. Falcons are 0-4. Theory here. The Falcons would have made the switch to Michael Penix Jr. this week against the Vikings. But it's the Vikings, and it's Kirk Cousins' homecoming to Minnesota. And now that this one's out of the way, like, now that the Falcons are 0-4, I think they put in Michael Penix Jr. next week. They gave Kirk Cousins one final hurrah, like, okay, do your thing against your old team, put up a bunch of yards, put up a bunch of touchdowns, have your classic rivalry game. But I'm predicting, and I could be way off on here, that the Falcons are going to make that switch to Michael Penix Jr. this week.
See it. I mean, I'd probably disagree and bet against it only because they're still in the divisional hunt, and they just paid this guy $100 million.
Yeah, that's where the problem. Yeah. That's where the problem comes in. The money. I mean, hypothetically, you take out the $100 million.
Yeah, so I would probably bet against it. Although they're going to be lobbying for it. Atlanta's going to be lobbying for it. All the momentum's going to be pushing towards Penix Jr. But the reality is, they're still in the divisional hunt, and I think they'll give Cousins a couple more games and maybe even a couple of games at the beginning of next season, so they don't look like they just completely crap the bed on this deal and before they put him in a backup role or try to dump his salary to someone else. And that might be happening. I mean, that could legitimately be happening in the offseason as well. There's plenty of need for quarterback, and I'm a big believer in Cousins as a player, as a character, as a person. I think you and I agree. We're a big fan of him as an individual, as a man. So I could see some interest in a team that's close, maybe has some of those pieces just like Atlanta was last year, that is willing to come in and take that. I bet you Atlanta would let him go cheap at this point. So they're willing to take willing to take the money. So who knows how that plays out? But, one thing we forgot too is, when you said it was a complete game, it really was, because we had that turnover on special teams as well. Had the missed field goal, but Rikers is a little, little rusty. It's first. Yep.
Off the upright. The upright. It wasn't like a wide left. It wasn't like a wide right. Could have snuck in either way.
First game back. So, I mean, I think we're looking good, man. I think we're looking really good. And, I mean, who'd have thought? Didn't you predict 5 wins?
Definitely nobody. You talked about it earlier. The over-under odds for the Vikings this year was 6.5 via DraftKings. Now they're 11-2, so the worst that they can be this year is 11-6.
It's so wild.
Is that nuts? That's crazy. I talked about Kirk Cousins' number earlier. 0 touchdowns, 8 picks the last 4 games. Compare that to Darnold. 11 touchdowns, 0 interceptions these last 4 games.
He's going to win Offensive Player of the Week this week. He'll probably win Offensive Player of the Month if he has another good week. And then he probably, like to your point, because they won't give it to Darnold, they won't give the MVP to Darnold, but they will give Comeback Player of the Year for him. I think he's a lock for that at this point.
They changed up the rules somehow. So, he might not even I don't know what the rule is. So, he might not even qualify for it this year because there's some NFL rule change on that criteria. And it's like, oh, no, we're going to do this way. Now we're going to do that. I don't know what it was, but before the season started.
Because he'd rather have $20 million, $25 million a year than at the minimum, other than, a trophy on his trophy shelf. So, that's the prize for Darnold, and I think everyone's happy for him. Now let's see what this guy can do down the road, because it's looking pretty. And, the other thing that I took away is this is the prototypical offensive game that we're looking for when you look at Addison, Jefferson, Hawkinson, Aaron Jones. I mean, even Akers really blew it open. That guy's got something, man. He has an ability to make the first guy miss better than I've seen I really like the way he runs in the backfield. And so
Cam Akers, you're saying?
Yeah, he's just, he's got an elusiveness to him in the backfield. That's really...
Which is the craziest story ever. Do you know him? Have you heard it? Coming back from 2 Achilles tears.
In LA, right?
2.
He was a Ram. But then he played for O'Connell or in his offense, didn't he, at some point?
Last year, he was a Minnesota Viking last year. And then he tore his Achilles again, signed with the Houston Texans this summer. Vikings trade back for him. And then... his story is incredible.
So when you look at that statistically, 130 plus for Addison, 130 plus for Jefferson, 4 for 50 yards roughly for Hawkinson. It's like this is kind of the distribution that you're really looking for when you line up the Vikings offense and you kind of drool over it on paper, which we arguably have the best and most talented offense in the NFL. I mean, on paper, it's hard to argue with that. And so this is probably the first time all year where I feel like this distribution of what this offense could really look like kind of statistically aligned with the potential. So if they can keep that going and they find the right balance, if O'Connell can keep the right balance there and know how, one game it'll shift to 100 yards for Hawkinson and 50 for Addison or this, but if he can get that mix right, man, we're going to give everyone we look at absolute hell on the football field.
100%. And this might be a hot take, so fire the hot take alert. Yeah, the Minnesota Vikings offense goes as Justin Jefferson goes. Okay, I get it. Like, he's the guy that draws the attention on the Minnesota Vikings defense. He's the most valuable wide receiver on the Minnesota Vikings. But here's where the hot take comes in. The Minnesota Vikings offense is only going to be as good as the amount of times Sam Darnold throws the ball in Jordan Addison's direction. Meaning, because Jefferson receives and takes on all the attention from the Vikings defense, throwing it Jefferson's way all the time is not going to work. Right. And that's what Darnold was doing earlier in the year. He was getting tunnel vision towards Jefferson. He was throwing him the ball regardless if there's 3 or 4 guys because he is that good and he can make that play. But what was happening mid-season, he was throwing it to him regardless. And Addison is wide open down the field on a one-on-one coverage. And no one can hang with Addison when it's one-on-one. And now what we're seeing is a shift towards Darnold throwing the ball deep to Addison, throwing in Addison's way. And that's why he had 3 touchdowns today.
And when he caught that under route before he scored, I think his second touchdown was after his long bomb. That little shiftiness, just the way he moved his hip out of the way, popped back and walked into the end zone. I was just like, I'm like, Page is the GOAT right now, for sure. But you have a legitimate game-changing number 1 wide receiver on the other side in almost any other team, on any other team. And if Darnold can have the exact
100%.
Same confidence with Addison that he has with Jefferson and understand that he doesn't have to force it to either one of them because he has both, you're 100% right. I'd say half of those interceptions he has on the year right now is because he zeroed in on Jefferson and forced the ball. And like you said, I get it. Like, how nice would that be to just be like, where is he?
Jefferson is the best receiver in football.
Who cares?
Right.
And you can still do that in a pinch.
Right.
When you need 7 points and you got 20 seconds on the clock and you got to go 40 yards, yeah, you can still do it. Don't worry about it. You still might catch that ball. So that's a beautiful thing. But you're right. And we're going to be lucky to keep that guy, when his next contract. So
100%, yeah.
So use him now. But
for sure. He's gone.
Amazing when, didn't get grayer or older watching this one.
Felt good. Yeah. It felt light. It felt light. Yeah, it felt good. But I think we touched on numerous topics and we dove into the Minnesota Vikings win. So you know what we need to do? We need to talk about a future sponsor of the Minnesota Tim podcast, Snap Fitness of Andover, Minnesota. Tell us about it. Give us the details. Dan is the owner of Snap Fitness. So Dan, come on, just give me the deets.
It's the most beautiful Snap Fitness you've been into. It's 7,000 square feet. Locally owned and operated. It's absolutely gorgeous.
Oh,
and
yeah.
We're a triple threat, okay? We're a triple threat, just like Addison on an end around, right? Like, we're a triple threat, okay? We got youth athletic and preventative coaching. We're at the top of our game on the mindset coaching, working with future Division I athletes. We signed, we had one signer Division I contract this year that we've been working with for 3 years. We got all of our middle schoolers in there. We're passionate about that. We got our lead trainer, Andy, who's amazing and runs our team of trainers, who focuses on your traditional gym stuff like, symptomatics, like weight and diet and those type of traditional health measures. And then you have my transformational coaching program called Seek First Coaching. This gets down into the mindset, the behaviorals, the psyche, the spirit. Why are you depressed? Why are you in those states? We got to do more than just exercise at that point. We have to realign our vision of reality. We have to change our behaviors, and we have to change from the inside out, not just the outside in. And so we've been dedicated to this for almost a decade. We survived COVID as a gym. We're fighters. We fight for you. And really, it's just all about you. We meet you where you are. You walk in that door. We know how difficult it is. And if you're not in Minnesota, if you're not close to us, we do all of this stuff online too. So feel free to reach out and ask questions, and we'll support you. We'll always be honest. We'll tell you where we think you need to go and what you need. And there's nothing more enjoyable for us to come alongside and lift people up and make them better. So.
And two things. One, I don't invite anyone just to be a guest on the Minnesota Tim Podcast. They're real, they're authentic, and they're good people. So Dan is real, authentic, and he's a good person. So I guess I said two things. That's three things. Dan Hines, appreciate you. Thanks for the time, my brother. Man.